Welcome to today's event, to today's talk with Professor Meelis Kitsing from the Estonian Business School in Tallinn. He made his PhD at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Today he will talk about platform power and artificial intelligence, who governs our digital futures. And I'm very interested in that topic, simply because, as you may know, at the beginning times of the web, a group called the Cypherpunks published their manifesto. And in it, they argued that in the digital future, it is very important to claim our privacy, to still have our privacy. And they argued that the way to go forward is via decentralization and via cryptography. And nowadays, unfortunately, we are seeing some centralization tendencies again with global platforms, with the central gravity of artificial intelligence. And yeah, we have a real expert to talk about that topic and answer all the questions we may have. So please take it away.
Thank you. Thank you so much for introduction. Thank you. And it's a great pleasure to be back. I was actually here in June 2018 when I was talking about digitalization in Estonia. I will mention a little bit Estonia in this talk, but this is somewhat more global approach. And at that time, I remember I was taking a train from Passau. I was also giving similar talks at different universities in Bavaria. So taking a train from Passau to Vienna, and in the process, when I was on the train, I was actually elected professor at the Estonian Business School. And now I have been almost 6 years now. I've been a rector of this private university in Estonia. So I'm serving my second term, and I'm actually here in Vienna because we have a meeting of rectors and deans at one of our partner universities here in Vienna, which is Vienna University of Economics and Business. So we have been working with them for quite a long time, and it's sort of a global conference of European Foundation for Management Development. So it's a pleasure to come to the Hayek Institute and also speak with you and discuss with you in addition to this great event here in Vienna. So what I'm going to do is that I have 5 questions. Of course, those are all very big questions, and someone could write a book about each of them. But I will briefly sort of try to cover those, and if you have any questions, so please let's do and discuss them. And first question that I would want to start with, why platforms and artificial intelligence, or why I'm sort of interested in that. I have kind of like a long academic interest in the topic, dating back at least 25 years when I was a graduate student at London School of Economics, and started working on those issues. And I remember at that time it was a very niche topic. Actually, I moved from London to Boston and continued working on those topics. And it was actually very difficult to find supervisors, at least in a sort of more traditional academic field, in fields in social sciences. It was not considered very important at that time, and a lot of people didn't pay attention. But of course, it sort of changed quite a lot. And this is just one example, a book that I've written that was published by Routledge a couple of years ago in the series of Economics of Innovation, sort of tries to discuss this topic quite broadly from a variety of different perspectives, including also the themes that you mentioned. So I go all the way back to the 1990s and talk about this sort of those declarations about freedom of the internet and cyberspace and all that. Why is it? This is also from the book. I mean, like lots of things that I will show you are either from the book or some recent publications that I have published. So if you're interested, I can later on I can provide a full list of references and so on. But this is also from the book. basically, why is it sort of interesting is that so we have this sort of debate about technology, and it includes AI and all kind of other technologies. And AI itself is kind of a very loose concept. So it's subject to what we can call sort of conceptual stretching. People put a lot of things under AI, and so it's sort of difficult sometimes to talk about it in a sort of very general sense. But nevertheless, kind of coming from the political economy perspective, we have this sort of ongoing debate about technology. On one hand, obviously, we have technology optimists and we have technology pessimists. So I come from a country that is very technologically optimistic. That's a huge generalization. We do have skeptics as well, but in general, we are very optimistic about technology. But that's not sufficient to understand the debate. I mean, another way to think about it is that you can be technology optimistic, but you could also be pessimistic or optimistic about the consequences. So if you think about the AI, then I think a lot of people in economics, they're going to think about AI as a sort of we talk about large language models and so on. They think about it as a sort of something that complements us as humans, right? So this sort of complementarity versus substitutes is a long debate in economics, right? So to what extent technologies are complementary and what extent they substitute us. So we think about it as a complement. So we can become more productive and so on. In Estonia, government just launched, for instance, AI, Estonian kind of big AI program. And it's all based on this idea that it's sort of complementary, right? So no worries, we'll do it. And sort of similar way as we did things maybe in the 1990s. However, you have to recognize that there could be also consequences that are not so positive. So if you think about labor markets, you could have sort of technological unemployment. One of the Estonian guys who founded Skype, Jan Tallinn, he's concerned about the future of humanity, right? So he published a piece in Estonian daily newspaper recently arguing that look like war in Ukraine or conflicts of Middle East, in the long run, they are not as consequential as the AI for the future of humanity, right? So a human species could. So that goes all the way from the sort of labor market consequences, the impacts on us as humans, right? So this is kind of a, let's say, more critical approach about the consequences of the technology. And obviously, then there are those, I don't know if you know Robert Gordon, famous economic historian in Chicago. So he kind of says that, well, all this sort of technological stuff we have now, digitalization, AI, it's kind of nothing in comparison with steam engine or those sort of technologies a couple of hundred years ago that really sort of changed productivity and so on. So they're not as important, basically, in a sort of broad historical perspective. And obviously, then there are those who are kind of pessimistic about both technology and its social consequences. So this debate itself is very interesting. And of course, it's not just the academic debate. For instance, it's very much related to this company, Bolt. It's one of Estonian unicorns. And so here is a range of services that you can use with Bolt. And it's, I can use all of them in Estonia. Bolt Drive, rideshare, bikes, scooters, food. But when I come to some other cities, only some of those services are allowed, right? I think in Copenhagen, you cannot really use this one. You can use this one. Maybe you can use a rideshare. And so I think it also sort of translates to sort of the question of regulation, right? So it's also practical interest, why I'm interested in this topic. And Bolt is an interesting company also from the point of view of my own organization, Estonian Business School. So this guy on the photo, Martin Villig, he founded Bolt together with his younger brother. But Martin is a graduate of my university. So he's also now our honorary doctor. So we awarded him honorary doctorate 2 years ago together with one Nobel Prize winner, Bengt Holmström from MIT. So we always give it to one academic and one sort of practical guy, so practical entrepreneur. So when we sort of talk about the societal impact of the university, which is a big debate today, and we can say that, well, in this case, it has been in billions, right? Because this company is valued in billions, right? So of course it's kind of indirect, and we can sort of debate, what's the role of university there. But he did undergraduate studies at our university, and he's still involved in our alumni community. Another example of our kind of impact and why I'm interested in this topic is that it's because of this guy here. He used to be my student 10 years ago, took a bunch of my economics courses, and he's a founder of Generative, which is another Estonian unicorn. It's business to business unicorn. Obviously, at that time, talking about the future a bit later, they haven't managed to do what they promised to do 10 years ago, but it's still a useful company. There are competitors, but they have turned it into, a company valued over billion, right? So one of the unicorns, not as valuable as Spoiled, maybe not as well known, but business to business company. And maybe the last example, and that also sort of a little bit expresses this concern of my talk when talking about the digital platforms, is that, so those are a bunch of my students, and they found a company called Ready Player Me about 10 years ago. And we as a university, we actually do invest in companies. So we're a private university, we have a foundation. I'm also chairman of the foundation, and we were the first investors in this company. And a couple of weeks ago, they were sold to the Netflix. Okay. So in one hand, it's a good story, right? It's a good story that, they worked 10 years and now it's sold to Netflix, and they make, they're millionaires now. They're not billionaires as some of the previous guys, but they're millionaires, right? But on the other hand, it's a sort of sad story. Sad story for Estonia and sad story for Europe, which is actually in the center of this talk, is that often here we sell our companies to the big platforms, right? So American platforms, and it's difficult to grow, right? Or I don't know, is it because we as a business schools, we are not very good in teaching management, or is it because there's not enough access to capital? Is it sort of cultural thing? I think it's overdetermined, but we're not as good as Americans or Chinese growing large companies, and often the difficult story is that it will be sold, right? So those guys haven't sold out yet. We'll see how long they will last. But Bolt hasn't sold out, right? They have sort of managed to compete with Uber in their own game, but those guys did sell. Maybe the good side is that now we will have a Netflix office in Tallinn, not so far from my home. So we'll see what happens. And this is another example. What we do is that, this is example of the direct investment into company, but then we also have accelerators such as Wise Guys, which we own, and those guys have invested in 500 companies all over Europe, also in Africa. Financial Times ranked them as among top 20 university-related accelerators in Europe. So they're based in our building in the central Tallinn, and we are one of the owners. And another example of the sort of like a practical interest or concerns are those guys. I don't know if you know them, but those are the founders of Skype some more than 20 years ago. So they went very quickly from prototyping, I think within 2 years. So they went from prototyping into unicorn. First, they were purchased by eBay. Then they were like 2.6 billion. And then they were kind of buying the company back from the eBay. And then in 2008, this happened. I don't know if you know the guy, but friend of Bill Gates, Steve Ballmer from Microsoft was in Estonia, as it's seen here. And they purchased Skype for like 8.5 billion, right? And again, like the story that we can build a wonderful company, run it for a while, and then some big platform will come and buy it up, right? Which of course is also, it's in one hand, it's a bit sad, but on the other hand, it's also positive because we can talk about something called Skype effect. Skype as a service, as a product, doesn't exist anymore. Microsoft closed it down. But Skype effect is still alive. So this is the picture of the Skype effect. So that's the most valuable Estonian unicorn. And those two guys here in front are by net worth richest guys in Estonia. They're billionaires. One of them lives in London, but another guy lives in my neighborhood, not so far from me. And I see him biking around now and then. So basically, David, who lives in my neighborhood, he was the first employee of Skype. Okay. So, and that's the Skype effect, that a lot of alumni of Skype went on to found new unicorns, new startups. I didn't mention that Martin is our graduate. He also used to work for Skype, right? So people went on to move new companies. So they have this experience of building, scalable businesses really quickly. And another point is that there was a money, right? So Skype brought a lot of money into this segment of Estonian economy, and it was easier for them to raise money because of previous experience. And the third, obviously, is sort of inspiration, right? But you can actually do it, In the 2000s, now I think a lot of people talk about the ecosystem in Estonia, but some 20, 30 years ago, nobody really knew the country. It was like post-Soviet, ex-Soviet, and now you can actually do it. You don't have direct flights to US or any of that, but you're actually able to do it, and you're able to build it. So this is the most valuable unicorn in Estonia. It has not been sold yet to any large platforms. They had an IPO, I think like 5-6 years ago in London. But again, in a way, they struggle, I would say, in comparison with US tech companies. I know that because I've been heavy user. I'm also investor. I own the stock, and it's not performing well. So at the same time, the US stock market has been going up and up. But if you look at the stock of Wise, that's the company now as it's known. So it's not doing so well. So it's again like a positive side, but also sort of a sad side, I guess, for some of those companies. And this photo is actually taken in front of Bank of England in London, because they have a headquarters in London, but 70% of the workforce is about 500 meters from my house, so in Tallinn. So about 2,000 employees are in Tallinn. But it's a global company, but again, not as large as some of the companies that we are going to talk about. So I'm moving here to my second question about digital platforms and why they matter. Obviously, they matter because of some simple empirical things. If you just simply look at the 10 largest public companies in the world, more than 20 years ago, very few of them could be characterized as digital platforms, but now a lot of them have basically they kind of like dominate this companies, large companies by the market capitalization, and basically not all digital businesses are platforms. Okay. So that's very important to understand. Like not all of them, because this is also the term that is used very freely, that platform this and platform that. So there is that distinction what platforms are. So that's one possible definition. It's sort of talking about business ecosystem. You have complementarities, modularities, talking about network effects. And often you can build platforms on platforms. Amazon is a platform, but you can build a platform on Amazon if you want to. And there is a significant literature on that. I'm not going to go through all of that, but I discuss most of it in my book and some other articles. Maybe an important concept here is a network effect, right? So we all know that how important they are. We're using here PowerPoint. Everybody uses PowerPoint or using Word. And one reason why we use that is because of network effects. The same with social media. I would be on my own social media app. It wouldn't make sense if my friends are not there, and more my friends will come there and sort of build some of the network effects. They also have a tendency to be sort of winner-take-it-all and kind of organizations. So you have lock-ins. So once you sort of start using it, it's difficult to get out. And I guess a very important concept is sort of two-sided or multi-sided markets. was already developed before the rise of the digital platforms. So there's a name of de Rol there who got the Nobel Prize in economics for that. But if you look at Google, for instance, Google supposedly gives search for free, right? But of course, we know from economics that there is no such thing as a free lunch. So in order to so this is one side of the game. The other side of the game is that you basically we all pay in the sense that our information is used to build up this sort of tremendously successful advertising engine. So it's advertising engine that sort of uses this data that we enter the search and aggregates it. And so this is how they make money in order to offer something for free. So then you can also have multi-sided markets and so on. And then there are long tail markets, sort of niche markets that platforms enable. Again, like in Amazon, you can find books that you can find in the regular bookstore, and it's sort of quite efficient for the platforms to service. And I will talk a little bit about sort of platform dependent entrepreneurship a bit later. So now I can go to the third question. What was that? What does the AI mean? This sort of broad concept of AI. What does it mean for those ecosystems? And what we mean by ecosystem. So this is there are different ways of sort of think about ecosystem, but this is from the management scholars, Jack Peters at London Business School, and they sort of distinguish between hierarchy-based value system and market-based value system. And so we have ecosystem-based value system. So we're basically you have sort of complementarities, right? So and modularities rather than sort of direct directions between the seller of the products. And it's not a sort of hierarchical as a typical business. So it's something in between, right? So this is one definition of ecosystem. It's from my perspective, I also discuss it in the book, is that from my perspective, it's like one way to think about it. It's quite rationalistic. Idea here is that you as a company, you can sort of define, you can sort of organize ecosystem around your business, right? If you look at for instance, the IPO of Alibaba some years ago, then they mentioned the word ecosystem something like 150 times. So everybody uses this word. But of course, especially sort of related to, I guess, like Boston School of Economics or Hayek, ecosystem could be also a result of sort of spontaneous order. So it's the result of unintended consequences. So you start doing something and it sort of emerges. So if I would have to give a talk about Estonian digitalization, and I've written about that, I would emphasize this view, basically, that this is more spontaneous. So it's sometimes that people rationalize it after it has happened, right? And so this is deliberate design that we wanted to do it. But for instance, all this sort of Skype story and all I told you, I've also discussed it briefly. I think there was a lot of sort of unintended elements there. So it was more like a spontaneous design rather than sort of deliberate approach. So this is maybe one example how to illustrate an ecosystem, right? So those are delivery robots, right? And those are designed by one of the Estonian companies called Starship Technologies. This company is founded by one of the former Skype founders, two former Skype founders. It's also super successful, for instance, in US college campuses. You want your coffee from the Starbucks, they will deliver it to you, right? But those photos are taken in my neighborhood. So when I was in COVID, often they would deliver my groceries to me, right? So, and in a way, there are a lot of complementarities here. I mean, you have this delivery robot, but you also have shops. You have people selling all kind of goods that can be delivered. Children love them, so they treat them a little bit like pets. That you can sort of touch them. And when I was at home and used those delivery robots, they were always a bit late. because there are a lot of schools around and they were stopped by children and they sort of tried to touch it and so on. So this is maybe like one example how companies have tried to build those ecosystems. But it's also sort of interesting in the context of AI, is sort of ask the question that what are the things that we are sort of dealing with, right? And here is an example of two different companies that kind of seem similar. One is this Starship Technologies, right? And another one is a Miller Robotics. So both are robotics companies. So this company, Miller Technologies, actually being heavily used in the front line in Ukraine. And the question is that if you sort of think about it, what do you think, which sectors do those companies belong to? How would you put it? Sorry?
Platform companies.
Platform companies, okay. But if you would think in terms of sort of more... those two, yeah. But if you would think more in terms of sort of traditional kind of economic sector categories, you have this sort of NACE classification, like services, manufacturing, then we have different types of manufacturing, different types of services. Anybody? What do you think? Vehicles? Okay, right, okay. Any other ideas? So because they're both vehicles. Yeah, you're absolutely right. They are. Yeah. Okay, that's good. And this is exactly what we get. I wrote a paper about those two companies. It's published in a book that just actually came out today by Springer. And I looked at their annual reports. So this is sort of the self-declared annual reports. And what happened in those sort of ecosystems, and especially with the AI, heavily AI focused companies, is that the sort of industry lines are blurring, right? So it's sort of unclear which sectors they are, actually. So in this case, you're right. Yeah, so you said motor vehicles. So in the annual report of this company says that they are in motor vehicles, right? Like Volkswagen, right? So it's a self-autonomous military equipment, basically. But this company, so they're basically also saying that we are manufacturing, right? But this company doesn't agree. They say that we are actually sort of technical sciences, R&D and technical sciences. I guess it's sort of similar to what you said, like software development, but even, R&D, right? So, but if you sort of think about it, they are very similar. In a way, they're both in those sort of technical software development. They're both in AI. In order for them to operate, they have to be in AI. They're very AI intensive, but they're also in manufacturing, right? So the industry lines are blurred because of this ecosystem and because of artificial intelligence. And those guys are actually joking. The guy who runs the company, he's also a graduate of our university, and he gave us a talk some time ago. And he was joking that, I don't know if you know the story, but Amazon actually tried to come up with a similar solution, but they failed. They gave it up. They worked on it for many years, and then a couple of years ago they decided that we're not doing it anymore. And those guys have been doing it more than 10 years. And they're sort of joking that look, I mean, there was only one of those robots that was stolen, and that was probably stolen by Amazon, right? So, and with Milrem, some of those Milrem robots have been captured in Ukraine by Russians, right? But it's just a chunk of metal if they don't have access to the AI, right? So the value is in AI. So in a way, you could sort of say that those are both AI companies because they have been using, experimenting, and building up a database that Amazon doesn't have or Russians don't have, and it takes a while actually to do that. So they're both AI companies in some ways, right? So this is, but it's increasingly very difficult, I think, and it will be in the future to say exactly like what sectors you are, because I don't know if you do, but I often in my work I have to sort of involve in those sectors, manufacturing versus services. And then like specific manufacturing versus specific services, and governments have a sort of policy saying that they want to support manufacturing and not services. But I think nowadays a lot of advanced manufacturing is very much also about service. So they're complementary. Yeah, please.
service as a device or as a service?
It's actually diverse. They sell it. I think those guys primarily sell it as a service, right? That the robots would operate. But I think they also have sold it. I think Bolt now owns. I don't know exactly what the relationship is, but now increasingly I also see Bolt using them. I don't know if they own the, because it's probably confidential, right? And I think in this case, you can buy an entire platform, but you could also probably buy some units, right? So it could be both basically, depending on the client, right? So yeah. And what happens also in this, I think ecosystems where we have a platform and AI is that look, in one hand, if you want to start a business, platforms, and particularly now with AI, large language models, foundation models, they make it easier to start a business than before when you were a traditional startup and so on. But what is changing is that if you become very successful, then the negative effect might emerge, right? So you're very dependent on this platform. So just imagine that you will start selling something on Amazon. You have a very good business model, but they know everything you do. And once they see that you're successful, it's very easy for them to replicate it, right? So, and with AI, I think it becomes even more so. So it kind of enforces this platform effect. So I guess diversification or not relying only on one platform, not relying only on one large language model or one foundational language model is really important here, right? So that you actually use different. You don't just use OpenAI, but use others and maybe more like open source solutions is important, right? I mean, this is just an example of the kind of like ecosystem to illustrate that Amazon selling books. Seems a very simple thing, but actually there is an entire ecosystem built around. And this is one example to kind of emphasize this point, is that if you think about big platforms and the ecosystems they build around, then as Martin mentioned also in the introduction, there's a trend towards centralization. And even in the cases where it seems that it's very kind of democratic or decentralized, so everybody can upload to YouTube, right? So it seems that everybody has access, I can share it with you and so on. But if you actually look at the monetization of YouTubers who make money out of YouTube, and who make most money, the geography is actually quite concentrated, right? So you get most people in California, right? So, and that has to do a lot while, people clicking it. If you think you click on something that is just, I don't know, your free time, you're enjoying yourself, but you're actually helping them to monetize it, are outside of the United States. And that has a lot to do also with the ecosystem. I'm sorry, it's a bit like complicated picture. Could spend hours explaining it. But the idea here is that you have two ecosystems that meet in the case of YouTube. And one is a technological ecosystem, Google, Alphabet company out of Silicon Valley. Another is basically what we can call Hollywood ecosystem, right? So the point here is that, if you want to become a successful YouTuber, not just in your own country, but worldwide, then probably at some point you will get some connection to Hollywood and they will help you to make it. So two ecosystems kind of meet here, right? And yeah, I think in the end, it's kind of an open-ended question that to what extent those digital platforms, are there, that can be visualized like this, kind of substitutes, destroying whatever you have, jobs or business models, and to what extent they are like complementary, right? That you can live within. And if this is a Japanese Astro Boy in English, but this Magna has been around in Japan for a long time, and the idea there is that we can live with technologies and complement each other, right? So, what are the potential implications of AI regulations? You sort of think about digital platforms and AI. And if I look at the different AI regulations, including the European Union's AI Act, and one way to sort of try to generalize it is that they try to aim at three things. So one is innovation, obviously, right? Then you have kind of safety and development of AI applications. And then there is sort of debate, this sort of question of sovereignty, that everybody wants to be somehow sort of sovereign over AI technologies. But the point is that probably it's difficult to accomplish all three goals at the same time. There are also different balances. I guess in the US case, there is a less concern about safety of AI than in the European Union. But it's difficult to accomplish all those three goals at the same time. And there's also a possibility that none of them are not well attended. And I guess it should be familiar here at the Hayek Institute that if you sort of think about regulation, then regulation often also has a lot of unintended consequences. And there's sort of a lot of literature on that. I mean, one sort of thing is that we have a different information asymmetries. So, if, for instance, sort of think about it, that you are trying to regulate AI as a regulator, then you always have a less information than those who actually developed AI. So, there are also different incentives. You know, if you look at the salaries of some of the AI developers, and they are way different from those who actually sort of are hired to regulate that, and sort of goes into various levels. I'm not sort of going to go through all of that, but there is a tremendous amount of literature that why regulations often don't achieve what they're sort of supposed to achieve. And what we also have is that we have also the world where the sort of what you can call it relative gains have become hugely important. So it used to be that perhaps the focus was more on absolute gains, that you sort of work together, trade, then you can grow together. But now the focus is very much on that who wins, who loses, right? And this sort of AI regulation is very much also subject to that, and that sort of enhances regulatory and overall uncertainty, right? In one hand, in the US, for instance, Trump has become kind of very much sort of deregulating AI, so canceling what Biden tried to do. But in the US context, there are also states, right? And there is a sort of worry that maybe states could become tougher in AI regulations, and that would be also a huge issue because if California would have some kind of AI regulations that are pretty strong, then that would have a effect across U.S. and other jurisdictions, not just in California. So I mean, I'm not saying that it's going to happen, but there is quite a lot of sort of uncertainty. What happens between EU, US, China, US, and what happens within the United States. And basically, yeah.
Need in this
Mm-hmm.
that relative gains are like decreasing or increasing for China relative to the European Union or rest of the world towards the US, which just
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's a long debate in international relations and international political economy. To what extent states are motivated by absolute gains or relative gains? An idea of absolute gains here is in the sense that if we work together, then in this position, when we work together, then we can kind of grow the pie, right? Okay. And so usually in international economic affairs, I guess that was more of a modus operandi, that we worked together to a certain extent, and you can get richer. But probably like in a military or security issue, it was more that, what is my position vis-a-vis? Is it like more like a win-win or win-lose, right? So this is, it is maybe a bit like a subject specific, but in international relations, it has been. And I guess now what we see that in technology, in economic relations, this kind of win-lose thinking is dominating, right? So which is focusing on what is my position vis-a-vis your position. Rather,
in this specific case, it should indicate that the rest of the world is gaining relatively to the US. Or should it?
This is just kind of stylized illustration, So, it could be also vis-a-vis China, or so. This is like stylized illustration. Like, it's not supposed to be like precise, but it's more like a concept, right? And another concept is that they basically teach that we increasingly playing the game of prisoner's dilemma, and this sort of stylized illustration that where the outcome is a nice equilibrium, which is a sort of suboptimal to the players in this AI regulatory game. So just to summarize this point before I go to the final point, and I will do the final point really quickly, is that if you sort of think about AI regulations, so there's a tremendous amount of sort of uncertainty and complexity coming from sort of different factors. And if we sort of go to the next question, how to think about the future, then probably we should do that in the context of different scenarios, right? Obviously, in Silicon Valley or in technology circles, people often say that, well, what's the point of sort of predicting or forecasting? Just do it, right? And then the future will come. But I think there's still quite a lot of possibilities that it might not happen. So then there are also the sort of forecast models that sort of try to tell us what the future will look like. One of them is a Gartner hype cycle. But if I've read some literature on that, then there was even like a question whether it's relevant in the context of AI, right? So, but in some cases it does work, in some cases it doesn't, because the problem there is that often if you sort of stuck very much into one model or one way of thinking, you may miss something important. So this is big from London School of Economics. We have late Queen Elizabeth II there. In 2008, she went to the London School of Economics and asked a simple question. And actually, at British Academia, they had an entire conference on this question. Like 33 economists got together from LSE and Oxford, and then they wrote this long report and letter to the Queen. And what I found very interesting in this context was that one line in this letter says that, why did it happen was that it was a failure imagination of many bright people. So kind of like a groupthink, collective, mental shortcuts, I guess, and not enough imagination. So because, you sort of think also about the futures of how the AI may affect us and who will govern, then, basically you have to think in terms of sort of different horizons, and also, what are the different levels of impact. So low impact, medium impact, high impact, and what is the time frame. So something that is not so important at the moment may become important in the future, and so on. So that's sort of the idea, rather than just sort of think in terms of one predictive model. I guess, or the debate about what colors are swans, black or white, right? Can be, it's also, even economists, as advertisements about it, arguing, there's one insurance company using it as a metaphor, or we could also bring in pandas. Pandas are not only black and white, they're also red, by the way. So again, like sort of thinking about a little bit like outside of the dominant approach. So that's why, like, one way how to sort of think about those futures for AI is through the different scenarios. So the different scenario methods. Here is a very simple one, which is called a two by two approach, but there are lots of sort of different ones. And here are some of the examples of the scenarios. So this is kind of a pre-generative AI scenarios by OECD, for instance, right? So I guess there's also AI scenario here. But what we see in reality at the moment is that, especially in the US, they kind of combine. So it's, you mentioned this sort of decentralization. I guess this scenario is more about like AI would enable us to have a more decentralized ecosystem and so on. But in this case, what we see that centralization and AI have sort of come in hand, right? And particularly big tech and maybe in the places like China, more like a government-dominated ecosystem. Here is also one set of scenarios we did in Estonia, where we sort of talked about the infrastructure, which sort of includes digitalization and AI, and we talked about EU cooperation, and we got basically 4 different scenarios. One was what we call the Compass Europe. I guess that's sort of your Brussels effect in work, right? So that you have a strong EU cooperation, and then you have huge developments in infrastructure, including the AI infrastructure in the broader sense. But you could also have a scenario where you have what we could call a Brussels effect, which is not unusual, that there's an overregulation, and as a result, the focus is somewhere else, and AI does not advance, right? And you could also have a scenario where there is no strong EU cooperation, but not also strong technological development, including AI. So it's a nice place to walk around, but not so competitive, I guess. And then we had a scenario, what we call the fast and curious. It's also possible that EU cooperation is not strong, but you have a sort of technological advancement without this cooperation. I guess more relying on the private money, private funding, and so on. So that's basically it's possible to think about it through the different scenarios, and you could also specifically sort of bring it to the AI and regulatory scenarios. Building on that, I guess open-ended question is that what's the impact of EU regulatory impact on sort of AI regulation? So you can write hundreds of pages, you can have this act, but what you're regulating is a moving target. So technology cycles are always ahead of those sort of moving targets. So that's why the sort of regulatory impact plus unintended consequences sort of talked about. So this regulatory impact is not very clear. Plus you have this sort of international political economy, in order to get along with Americans, maybe EU, I think that's almost like a fact, that they have sort of softened their approach, right? So you actually you have a nice regulation on paper, but you don't actually implement it as much. So it's not so much about writing the regulation, but it's more about what's the impact, what's the consequence, right? So it can be strong or weak. And then the question is that what we don't know about the AI is that, what's the advancement of the AI? Is it just the large language models, generative AI, or how far are we from reaching, general AI, right? So what's the advancement of technology? Is it just the hype? We have had AI winters before, so there's a rapid development in some areas, but then usefulness is not maybe so large, and then there is sort of this interest in that overinvestment, but we don't know that, so it's uncertainty in a way. So what you do in that type of scenario planning exercises is that you say that, okay, this is an important factor, but I don't know actually which way it's going. So possible in this case using this simple 2x2 approach, at least 4 different scenarios emerge. All right. Thank you.
Questions in just a moment. I have 2 questions before that. The first question is, you talked about that the most valuable thing for most of these companies are actually data. Do you think that this might change as artificial intelligence models might produce the data artificially, and therefore data becomes much less valuable as it is now?
I don't know what you exactly mean by producing data artificially. It seems to me that for artificial intelligence to work, they still need quite a lot of data. It's more like the question that how much resources you have to dedicate for collecting this data. And I didn't even touch on that because in some ways we sort of stayed on the sort of digitalization side. But if you think about those large platforms, then they are now also, this is again another example where that industry lines are blurring because of the AI, because now they're also energy companies, right? So they have, they are investing in nuclear power because in order to have this data, they need data centers. Data centers need electricity, and electricity consumption is at least predicted to go up, right? Unless you find a more sort of efficient ways how those sort of models operate. I think there have been even some studies that if you use ChatGPT and you just simply say thank you, how much electricity it consumes, right? So there is this sort of connection. I'm a little bit like, if you sort of say that they can themselves generate data, given all kind of biases that are built into those models, I'm a little bit like concerned that how trustworthy this data might be, because we already have issues, with interpretation and sort of use of the existing data that they collect. So I guess that's maybe how I can sort of tackle your question. But yeah.
Thank you. The second question is regarding regulation. You mentioned that much of the regulation is aimed at fostering innovation. The thing is, I personally think about regulation as functionally identical to censorship.
Sure.
Because censorship applies to speech and to writing, and regulation actually applies to acting. So I can't think how regulation really fosters innovation aside from bypassing or bystepping the regulation that is in place. How is this argued by politicians? What are the arguments brought forward?
Well, basically, that was not, to be clear, it was not my argument that regulation enhances innovation. It was more that I give, if I read, what people write about those regulations, who are behind those regulations, what they sort of claim that they want to achieve. And they had 3 goals. It was not just innovation. One was innovation, one was safety, and then was the sort of sovereignty, right? So 3 things that seem to be common. If I read about, Chinese regulations, regulations of Biden administration, executive order, or, most comprehensive EU AI Act. So at least sort of these 3 things seem to be common. Now there are sort of, my point was that you're not actually able to achieve all those 3 things, right? So if you focus too much on safety, it kills innovation. So if you focus too much on sovereignty, it could be not also good for innovation because you don't have a sort of exchange across different countries and different sort of experiences in developing it. So sort of like learning from each other, right? So I guess, if you sort of think from the point of view of politicians and what I see in the sort of regulatory debate, I think the argument is something like this, that Now, for instance, this business is involved in a certain business model, right? But now we will make it costly for them to continue as usual. And if they want to continue, then they have to become innovative in order to, meet those regulations. So I think this is the argument, from those who say that, regulations could actually enhance innovation. But again, like regulations is very, it's a very general term. It a little bit like depends on what you're sort of talking about. In a way, like intellectual property rights or regulations or and so on. And, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. If one would assume that these digital platforms are rather negative, like from rather negative end than on the positive end for a given society,
right?
What would be a way around? Like, do you see a way around, or is the dependency on these platforms already a big way around, whether it's American platforms or European platforms? Yeah. From a, let's say, European perspective, we don't have these platforms, so
I mean, it's a great question. I mean, when I was in the US, my main focus when I was doing a PhD was actually open source software. So we even published a book on open source software. Not so much, I'm not an engineer or a software engineer, but more from a sort of governance or management perspective. It was called Internet Success, and MIT Press actually published it. And I was working on this. There was a lead scientist, and I was working on it as a sort of doctoral student, right? So I guess from a sort of purely normative perspective, I'm a big fan of decentralization and going to the open source and so on. And we see a success of open source in some areas, right? So, but of course, in consumer applications, they haven't been so successful. And I think in AI also, there is this, I think that it would be worth writing a separate paper because there are some AI foundation models that claim to be open source. But I think some of them really not, in the sense that you sort of understand open source. So this is kind of like from very normative perspective, sort of try to encourage more open source, more decentralized solutions that maybe rely less on platforms. But I think it's also like highly personal issue, right? Like how we behave as consumers. So what I have noticed, I don't know if it's true about all of you, but what I have noticed as a user of big platforms that I've become much more conscious about how I use them, right? So I joined, for instance, Facebook 20 years ago. Initially, it was only available for students in the US. I was a student in the US. And I think initially I was very enthusiastic about it. And now I almost don't use it. So, and I'm actually wondering about the people who have a lot of time and use it heavily. So like you can also make like, I think like, I don't believe so much that, government regulation, but I do believe that, people kind of like get tired of it or they change their habits of behavior, and, sort of consciously do it. It could also have some impact, that rather than one person alone.
Yeah. The first one was like corporate application of open source technologies in different senses. That's what you meant.
You said corporate,
like
corporate, yeah.
Companies, but open source.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think what we kind of investigated. Our input was kind of like a collective action in open source, and I think like the claim, a lot of people saw open source as some kind of hippie movement, where people voluntarily sort of come together. and our claim was actually, our finding was that it's not true. I mean, a lot of open source projects were actually connected to the businesses. There was a business logic behind it. Some businesses actually decided to make proprietary software open because it was a new business model that they used. So there was a logic to that. So the logic was that you give it away, keep the product away for free, but it's kind of like how to put it. I think in a very technical language, I'm sorry, would be like a complex semi-public good, right? Because yes, I can give you very complicated software for free, but you don't know how to use it. So, and I will come and consult you how to use it, and I will ask money for my service. So in that sense, it was not just sort of bunch of hippies running around and doing stuff. It was actually behind the successful projects. There was always like a core team, and often they were linked to the company, at least in the cases that we studied, and they could have like hundreds of developers involved. But that's fantastic. I mean, like a lot of businesses want to be like that. If you have a company and then you build some kind of community around it, and people actually voluntarily contribute, kind of like a co-creation, user-driven innovation. Those are all those kind of decentralized models, kind of like the buzzwords that people like. And we saw a lot of that in open source. But there was always a core team who took the responsibility. Yeah, I think that could be the one way to go, but it's very difficult to go because you are fighting against very centralized, hugely powerful platforms. And what we saw also in open source was that successful projects often collaborated with other projects. They would form some kind of foundation, right? So one we studied was called OSGO, still exists. An idea of the foundation was precisely that they would actually protect them against those, lawyers who would try to come after them and say that you have violated my intellectual property rights or something like this, right? So and so on. So again, like lots of steps in this sort of collective action puzzle, but at least in certain areas it seems to be working, right? And you talk about cryptos and blockchain and sort of what applications, but overall, if you look at this sort of big picture globally, we see this sort of platformization towards centralization and so on. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
So a AI platform requires three main things: infrastructure, hardware, and etc. Then a very sophisticated software management, and then a lot of data.
Mm-hmm.
And more or less none of them we do have here in Europe. So
right. And
what is your vision of how probable is it that we will have a provider of a AI platform in Europe, and who might that be?
Mm-hmm.
Especially in case if for political reasons US will decide to cut off the lines.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have a good answer for that. That's a difficult question. So, but hope never dies, in that sense. I think in certain areas Europe does have certain advantages, diversity. There is still like I don't know, quite interesting sort of manufacturing companies, maybe more like a specialized platform. But if you look at the moment, then there have been some sort of interesting companies emerging in France and so on, but they're still not able to compete with US. So there is it's a difficult game, and I don't think that you will solve it by the EU AI Act or giving a little bit like subsidies here and subsidies there. So you can do it probably by sort of loosening some regulations, some actually more market integration would help in this area, because one problem with Europe is every area is that there's too much fragmentation, right? So
trying to subsidize is, by the way, what we're trying here in Austria.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I have a question about the acquisition of the tech companies in Europe. You said that it's a bad thing that they get acquired by some American companies. And I actually watched a talk by Peter Thiel in Germany.
Right, yeah.
And he basically said talk about Facebook, so it's better.
Yeah.
he said that basically when Mark Zuckerberg founded Facebook,
Right.
he pissed off his entire board because he didn't want to sell Facebook.
Right.
Even though everybody else wanted to sell it.
Exactly.
And he said that if Facebook was a European company, it would have been sold. So
yeah, exactly.
you as an economist, do you think it's there are like concrete economic reasons for that, or it's more of like a social problem?
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, I think we could go by company, but I guess it seems to me also that the ambition is much sort of lower in Europe, and it's sort of, you know, again, like I didn't say that it's necessarily bad that they sell to the US, because you could, given the circumstances, you know, you might not have any other option, right? Because you may have difficulties to grow it here. So I said that there are both like good things and sort of bad things about it, but that's the fact that it seems that there are some, you know, relatively interesting companies emerging, including my home country, and often what happens with them is that they're not able to grow on their own, right? And some try. So I gave the example of Wise, for instance, which is still has been around more than 10 years. They're still in the London Stock Exchange, but you know, as an investor in the company, it's kind of like a bad investment if I compare with the U.S. companies at the same time. So it could be. I think it could be ambition, right? So as I said, like maybe that's a social problem, I guess, like not sufficient ambition. It could be. Again, like it depends on the European country we're talking about. In the case of my own country, it could be sometimes also management quality, right? So we don't rank actually very high. There are those studies by IMD, Swiss Business School, you know, there are sort of studies about competitiveness and sort of talents and those indexes where they compare countries, and in some categories they actually rank pretty badly. One is, I guess, like sort of what we can broadly call like professional management. So maybe we are very good in starting things, but those who start them, those entrepreneurs, they are not so good in managing like a long-term growth and so on. But of course, there are exceptions. You know, like maybe Bolt is a good exception that founders still run it. At least one of them is involved. Maybe Wise as well, but in some other cases not. But again, it's not, but those companies are relatively small still in comparison with American companies. You know, we're talking about valuation with, you know, maybe 6, 7 billion or maybe 10 billion, and then, you know, in comparison, companies that are valued in trillions. You know, that's so that's yeah. So I think it's kind of a, you know, nice social science answer would be like over-determined. A lot of factors tangled together, ambition itself is important, but not sufficient. But you also need to kind of focus and improve the management quality. At least from my country's perspective, I think it could be different. Maybe there's like you know, Austria, you have lots of professional managers. You're much better at that than the Estonians, but it seems to be easier, right? Plus, we are a small country, so we have a limited number of people anyway who could be running it. So you have to bring them in, and then there's a question that if people want to live, I don't know, next to Russia and all that. So, right. Yeah, I hope I at least tried to answer your question. Yeah, please.
One thought on your first question is possible to generate data using AI and using the data, you're not depending on real data. They made an experiment. They created pictures using generative AI and used the pictures to learn the generative AI to create pictures. And this didn't work because after 2 generations, pictures were not even recognizable.
Sure.
Some kind of insert effect in the digital world as well.
Yeah.
You still depend on real data.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for this comment. Yeah, that's helpful. Yeah, this is something that, you know, along the lines that I sort of tried to think as well, that it could be not as reliable as you sort of think it would be. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you.
More questions?
Yeah, please.
shared economy, Airbnb, Uber, for instance, that very successful company. The government did everything to
Right.
It is reduced, regulated so that and they didn't think of the customer and the profit he had, but they thought of lobbies of the customer.
Yeah.
So I'm not afraid that the AI, I would like to know your point of view, is used by the governments because they have the power to collect data illimitedly. I mean, they can describe to me all the time what I have to deliver data, I mean, just about everything.
Right.
And so they have a big chance to gather a lot of data, and if they use it now with AI, I'm quite afraid to use it against people. How do you see this?
I mean, that could be, that could be certainly like one possible scenario that, the governments, and it's certainly like scenario that has been developing for a while in places like in China. So, I think, it depends a little bit. I think it's again like a little bit like what kind of social attitudes are. I come from a country that people are quite comfortable with government using data. It's even sort of surprising. But I see at the same time in places like in Austria or Germany or Switzerland, people are much more concerned about it, right? So, for instance, in Estonia, we have this ID card that was launched already 2002, I believe. And one of the things on this ID card, and it is heavily used in sort of digital transactions, is a personal ID code, right? It's a little bit like social security number in the US. And actually, my personal ID code is public. So if you would want to find my personal ID code, it wouldn't be very difficult. Just put my name into Google, and it will certainly at some point will come up. And of course you cannot do with it much because in order to make transactions, you need a bunch of other codes as well that are not public. But what is worrying about that is that the code is built in a way that you could tell immediately how old I am, what sex I am, and so on. And in Estonia, people are totally fine with it. There's no debate about it. So, for instance, number 3 here tells us that I'm a male. 73 tells us that I was born in 1973. And then it's a 05 tells us that it was made. So it's all like public information. But I could imagine that in places like in Austria or in Germany, that would be like a huge concern. People don't. And that's actually, it could be used for discrimination. That they want to hire males or want to hire someone who's over 50 years old, and it's all public information in Estonia, not very. So I don't know. For some reason, we have much higher tolerance for that. But it's and also I think you could see that also in some of the Nordic countries, in Sweden, a lot of tax information is much more available. So people have a little bit more tolerance towards. I guess government using this information or setting it up in a certain way, then maybe in places like in Austria or Switzerland or Germany. So it's a little bit like the social attitudes as well. But yeah, certainly it is a concern, and in Estonia I would like to have this debate about can we change those codes, but nobody's interested. So because to me it seems really going too far. And why is the information public?
So one last question, and after that we will continue the discussion in this room with snacks and drinks. So please.
Congratulations to Estonia. You have been a front runner in public services and bureaucracy. We had a close look from Austria, and we were far behind that.
All right.
And my question is, if you, as an investor, would have one wish for free, which platform is still not invented? In which new platform would you like to invest? And we together.
All right. Yeah, I mean, something in education, I would say. So, I mean, there are a lot of platforms in education, but they all seem to be so you've seen Simon in education and I use different platforms, but it seems to be still like a lot of fragmentation and maybe also user friendly. That would be maybe helpful. So just top of my mind when it comes to maybe that would be the opportunity for building a European platform, right? And by the way, if you're interested in those topics, I just gave a very brief talk today, but we're also organizing different programs at the Estonian Business School. So in the summer we have the best time to visit Estonia is probably in the summer. At the moment it's like -15 and a lot of snow, but sunny. Different from Vienna. But in the summer it's sunny and +20 and doesn't rain much. And in the summer we're organizing 2 programs. One is for entrepreneurs, so together with Startup Wise Guys that we talked about, and then we have another sort of more like academic program on digital-based summer school. So if you have interest, send me an email. Today I learned that already 18 Swiss people are coming from Switzerland. So we have a sort of tradition with some universities in Basel that they will come over in the summer. To Estonia, and why not with Austria as well? So if you have interest, send me an email and I will send you information. And we will have like a week-long debates on some of those topics that I'll try to go through the day and also do some scenario planning exercises and amazing list of speakers. Last year we had, for instance, Bengt Holmström, who's our Nobel Prize winner in economics, and he also talked about some of the cryptocurrency, stable coins, and what they mean for the financial system. So we talk about sort of digitalization topics from very different angles. Right? And this year, I think we have David Same, who's a professor at the University of Stockholm, published at places like the American Economic Review. We have some top government officials from Estonia, some top entrepreneurs. So so please send me an email and I will send you. It's also publicly available on the website, but I can give you a concrete link like EBS Summer School. You're welcome to Estonia. Right. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
For me, it's left to say that we have next event on March 20th, the FMRS in Vienna. Please join us. And also, we are always happy for new members at the Hayek Institute. So if you want to become a member, please join us. Thank you.
Thank you.